The sun was blazing high over the city, baking the asphalt outside the auto repair shop until the air shimmered with heat. Inside the garage, it wasn't much cooler. The place smelled heavy, a thick mix of old motor oil, burnt rubber, and the stale coffee that had been sitting in the break room pot since dawn. It was one of those chaotic Tuesday afternoons where everything seemed to go wrong at once. Phones were ringing off the hook, the hydraulic lifts were hissing and groaning under the weight of cars, and every mechanic in the shop had grease smeared across their foreheads and frustration written all over their faces. The waiting room was packed, too. It was a cramped space filled with uncomfortable plastic chairs that were bolted to the floor. People were squeezed in together, tapping their feet aggressively, checking their watches every 30 seconds, and sighing loudly. You could feel the tension in the room. It was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone was in a hurry, and nobody was happy about being stuck there. A mother in the corner was trying to quiet a crying baby, while a businessman in a suit was shouting into his phone about a missed meeting. In the middle of all this noise and anger, the front door chimed. A small bell rang above the glass entrance, announcing a new arrival. The man who walked in didn't look like he owned the place, and he certainly didn't look like he was there to cause trouble. He was wearing a simple dark jacket, worn-in jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked like just another guy trying to get his car fixed on a busy afternoon. But as he stepped further into the light of the waiting room, the receptionist behind the high counter did a massive double take. He stopped typing mid-sentence, his mouth falling open slightly. It was Keanu Reeves? He didn't have an entourage with him. He didn't have a bodyguard hovering over his shoulder to block people. It was just him, holding a motorcycle helmet in one hand and looking a little road-weary. He walked up to the counter with a relaxed posture, his eyes scanning the chaotic shop with a sense of understanding rather than annoyance. He looked like a man who knew what it was like to have a hard day at work. The receptionist, a young guy who was clearly overwhelmed by the line of people forming behind Keanu, tried to compose himself. He wiped his sweaty hands on his uniform and stammered, "Hi, welcome. How can I help you today?" Keanu stepped closer to the desk. He didn't lean over it or try to intimidate the kid. His voice was calm and quiet, barely audible over the sound of an air wrench in the garage. "Hey. I'm here for a service appointment. The name is Reeves." The receptionist started typing frantically on the greasy keyboard, his eyes darting from the screen to the famous actor standing in front of him. He could feel everyone in the waiting room watching now. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The grumbling stopped for a second as people realized who had just walked in. Usually, when a celebrity walks into a normal place like this, one of two things happens: either they demand special treatment immediately, or they try to hide under a hat and sunglasses. The receptionist winced as he looked at the computer screen. He knew this wasn't going to be good news. He hesitated, not wanting to be the one to deliver it. "Mr. Reeves, look, I'm really sorry, but we are totally backed up today. A part we need for your bike didn't come in on the morning truck. It's stuck in traffic on the freeway. We can't even start looking at it for at least 3, maybe 4 hours." There was a heavy silence in the shop. The mechanics in the bay stopped working for a split second, peeking out from under the hoods of cars to see what would happen. Everyone was waiting for the explosion. They were waiting for the movie star to pull the "Do you know who I am" card. It happens all the time. People get angry when they are kept waiting, especially when they are used to a life of luxury and speed. They expected him to yell, to demand to see the manager, or to walk out in a huff. But Keanu didn't get angry. His face didn't twist into a scowl. He didn't sigh loudly or roll his eyes at the incompetence of the situation. He just stood there for a moment, processing the information with a thoughtful expression. He looked around the shop again, really seeing it this time. He saw the sweat on the mechanics' backs, the piles of paperwork on the desk, and the stress in the receptionist's eyes. He saw that these guys were doing their best in a tough situation. Then, he simply nodded his head. "Okay," Keanu said softly, giving a small shrug. "That happens. I understand. No worries." The receptionist blinked, completely stunned. He had braced himself for a shouting match. Really, because I can try to call around to other shops, or maybe I can squeeze you in." "No, don't do that," Keanu interrupted gently, holding up a hand to stop him. "You guys are busy enough. I don't want to add to the stress. I'll just wait." "Wait here?" the receptionist asked, gesturing to the crowded, noisy, and uncomfortable room. "Yeah, here is fine," Keanu replied with a small, easy smile that reached his eyes. "I've got nowhere else I need to be." "Really, it's okay." He turned around and walked into the waiting area. The crowd of people watched him like a hawk, parting like the Red Sea as he moved through the room. He didn't look for the best seat. He found an empty spot on a small, cracked plastic bench against the wall, right next to a stack of old car magazines and a vending machine that was humming loudly. He sat down, set his helmet on the floor between his feet, and leaned back. He didn't pull out a fancy phone to make a loud business call. He didn't demand a comfortable chair from the back office. He just sat there, looking at the cars on the lifts in the garage bay, watching the mechanics work with genuine interest. He looked perfectly content to be just another person in the crowd. The tension in the room that had been so thick a moment ago began to feel strange. Here was a man who had millions of dollars in the bank, who could have bought a whole fleet of taxis, or just sent an assistant to deal with this nightmare. But instead, he chose to sit on a hard plastic chair and wait his turn. It was a quiet moment, but it spoke volumes to everyone watching. The staff went back to work, shaking their heads in disbelief, while the other customers in the room started looking at their own phones a little less aggressively. They had all just witnessed something rare, someone powerful choosing to be powerless, simply because it was the kind thing to do. The afternoon sun continued to beat down on the shop, trapping everyone inside, but the mood inside had changed, all because of how one man reacted to bad news. He was just sitting there, blending in, waiting for his turn, just like any other human being on the planet. And nobody could quite believe it. Time seemed to move slower inside that auto shop than it did anywhere else in the world. The first hour dragged by, then the second. The air conditioning in the waiting area was struggling to fight against the heat coming from the garage bays, making the room feel stuffy and warm. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a constant, headache-inducing hum. For a normal person, this would be the perfect recipe for a bad mood. For a famous movie star used to luxury trailers and private jets, it should have been torture. But Keanu Reeves just sat there. He was squeezed onto that small, hard plastic bench, his long legs tucked in so he wouldn't block the aisle. He had taken off his jacket and laid it neatly beside him. Every now and then, he would lean forward, resting his elbows on his knees, watching the mechanics work through the glass partition. He looked completely focused, as if he were studying for a movie role. He watched them crawl under cars, he watched them wrestle with rusty bolts, and he watched them wipe sweat from their eyes. There was no boredom on his face, only a quiet respect for the hard work being done. Around him, the mood of the other customers was getting much worse. The initial shock of seeing a celebrity had worn off, and reality had set back in. People were hungry, people were tired, and people were late. To his left, a businessman in a crisp gray suit was pacing back and forth. He had been on his phone for 20 minutes, yelling at someone about a lost contract. He was aggressive, loud, and rude. Every time he paced past Keanu, he would shoot a dirty look at the counter, as if his staring could make the mechanics work faster. On his right, an older woman was sighing loudly, tapping her foot on the linoleum floor with a rhythmic, annoying click click click. She kept checking her watch and muttering under her breath about how this was ridiculous service and how she would never come back here again. The tension in the room was climbing again. The receptionist was getting yelled at by another customer who didn't understand why his oil change was taking so long. The noise level was rising, the stress was palpable, and the atmosphere was turning toxic. The shop manager, a heavy-set man with a greasy rag hanging from his pocket, noticed what was happening. He looked through the glass window and saw Keanu sitting calmly in the middle of the storm. The manager's heart sank. He knew who it was. He knew that having a massive star sitting in a crowded, noisy room while angry customers yelled at his staff was a PR disaster waiting to happen. It looked bad. It felt disrespectful. The manager wiped his hands on his pants and took a deep breath. He walked out of the garage and into the waiting area. The room went silent for a second as the heavy door swung shut behind him. He walked straight over to Keanu, looking nervous. "Mr. Reeves," the manager asked, his voice sounding a little shaky. Keanu looked up, his eyes kind and attentive. "Yeah, hi." The manager leaned in close, lowering his voice so the other customers wouldn't hear. He felt terrible. "Listen, I am so sorry about this wait. It's crazy today. I cannot believe we are making you sit out here with all this noise." He gestured vaguely at the arguing businessman and the sighing woman. "We have a private office in the back. It's quiet. There's a comfy sofa, a fridge with cold water, and a TV. You can wait back there. It's much better. Please, come with me." It was a genuine offer. It was the VIP treatment. Anyone else in that room would have jumped at the chance to escape the crowded, smelly waiting area. The businessman on the phone actually stopped pacing to see if Keanu would take the offer, probably jealous of the special treatment. Keanu looked towards the direction the manager was pointing, then he looked back at the manager. He smiled that same easy, humble smile he had when he first walked in. He didn't stand up. He didn't grab his helmet. "Thank you," Keanu said softly. "That is really nice of you to offer. But I'm okay here." The manager blinked, confused. "Here, but it's loud. And there's no AC really working out here. You don't have to sit with everyone else." Keanu shook his head gently. "No, really. I'm good," he insisted. "I don't want to be a bother. And honestly, I'm kind of enjoying watching the guys work. It's interesting." The manager stood there for a moment, stunned. In a world where everyone is constantly looking for an advantage, where everyone is looking for the easiest way to do things, here was one of the most famous actors on the planet refusing a comfortable room just so he wouldn't make a fuss. He didn't want to take the mechanic away from his work. He didn't want to act like he was better than the crying baby or the angry businessman. "Are you sure?" the manager asked one last time. "Because it's really no trouble." "I'm sure," Keanu said firmly but kindly. "I'll just stay here. Save the office for someone who needs it." The manager didn't know what to say. He just nodded slowly, a look of pure admiration on his face. "Okay. If you need anything, anything at all, you just tell me. I will. Thanks, Keanu replied. The manager walked back to the garage, shaking his head in disbelief. As the door closed, the noise of the shop rushed back in, the shouting, the sighing, the ringing phones. But none of it seemed to touch Keanu. He shifted his weight on the hard bench, stretched his legs out a little bit, and went back to watching the mechanics. The businessman on the phone stopped pacing again. He looked at Keanu, then at the door the manager had just gone through. For a second, the anger on his face faded, replaced by a look of confusion. He couldn't understand it. Why would someone choose to stay in the discomfort when they had a ticket out? It was a small moment, just a refusal of a room, but it changed the energy of the shop. The staff working in the bay saw what happened. They saw that the movie star didn't think he was too good for their waiting room. It made them want to work harder. It made them feel seen. Even the angry customers seemed to settle down a bit, realizing that if Keanu Reeves could wait patiently without complaining, maybe they could too. The sun outside started to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the floor. The wait continued, but the impatience in the room had lost its teeth. Keanu just sat there, a quiet island of calm in a sea of stress, proving to everyone that class isn't about where you sit, but how you act. The wait continued. The hands on the wall clock seemed to be moving slower and slower, ticking away the minutes with a mocking slowness. The grease and exhaust fumes from the garage were starting to feel heavy in the air, and the uncomfortable plastic chairs were testing everyone's patience. The mood in the waiting room was dipping back into that deep, dark funk of irritability. Sitting directly across from Keanu was a family that was having a much harder time than everyone else. It was a young couple, looking completely exhausted, with two small children who had reached their limit. The little boy, who was about 5 years old, was bouncing off the walls, literally running in circles around the chairs. His younger sister, a toddler with messy hair, had decided that this was the perfect time to scream at the top of her lungs because she had dropped her juice box. The father looked like he was about to crack. He was wearing a stained t-shirt and had dark circles under his eyes. He kept trying to grab his son to stop him from running, but the boy was too fast. The mother had her head in her hands, rubbing her temples, looking like she just wanted to teleport to a different planet. You could feel the stress radiating off them. Everyone else in the room was looking at them with annoyed side eyes, waiting for someone to tell them to control their kids. Keanu watched all of this with a gentle expression. He didn't look annoyed. He looked sympathetic. He saw a family doing their best in a tough situation. He saw the father's embarrassment and the mother's defeat. Slowly, Keanu stood up. The movement caught the attention of the people nearby, including the angry businessman, who paused his phone call to see what the movie star was going to do. Maybe he was finally going to complain about the noise. Maybe he was going to ask to be moved. But instead of walking toward the counter to demand quiet, Keanu walked over to the chaotic family. He didn't stand over them like an authority figure. He crouched down on one knee, bringing himself down to the eye level of the children. It was a move that immediately disarmed everyone. He wasn't a scary adult looming over them, he was just a guy on the floor. "Hey," Keanu said softly, looking at the little boy who had just stopped running to stare at him. The boy froze, his eyes going wide. He recognized the face from the posters at the video store, but he couldn't quite place him. "Hi," the boy whispered back. Keanu smiled, a warm, genuine thing that made his eyes crinkle in the corners. "I like your shoes. Do they help you run super fast?" The boy looked down at his sneakers, then back at Keanu, and a huge grin broke out across his face. "Yeah. They are rocket shoes." "Rocket shoes, no way," Keanu said, pretending to be impressed. He turned his head to look at the father, who was staring at Keanu in total shock. "You better be careful, Dad. I think he might blast off." The father let out a nervous laugh, the tension in his shoulders dropping instantly. "Yeah, sometimes I wish he would." Meanwhile, the little girl was still whimpering about her spilled juice. Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a clean, crinkled napkin he had saved from a coffee shop earlier. He handed it to the mother. "I'm sorry," he said to her, his voice low and kind. "It's a mess. But honestly, my coffee spills are usually way worse." The mother took the napkin, her hands shaking a little. She looked up at him, blinking away tears of stress. I am so sorry about the noise. They are just tired." "Don't worry about it," Keanu said, shaking his head. "They are actually doing great. I was way worse when I was a kid. I think I broke 3 lamps just sitting still." He looked back at the little girl and made a funny face, crossing his eyes and sticking out his tongue slightly. The girl stopped crying immediately, stunned into silence, before letting out a tiny giggle. "See," Keanu whispered. She's got a great laugh. The interaction was so simple, so natural, that it felt like they had known him for years. He didn't talk about Hollywood. He didn't talk about his money. He talked about rocket shoes and spilled coffee. He treated these strangers like they were his own neighbors. For the next 10 minutes, Keanu sat on the floor with them. He didn't have his phone out. He didn't check the time. He listened to the little boy talk about dinosaurs with total seriousness, nodding along like the boy was teaching him something very important. He made the parents laugh with stories about his own bad luck with cars. He acted as a buffer between them and the rest of the angry room, creating a small bubble of peace around their bench. The staff in the garage, who were watching through the glass window, were absolutely stunned. They were used to people throwing fits, yelling, and demanding discounts. They had never seen anything like this. Here was a man who could be anywhere in the world, sitting on a dirty floor in a repair shop, just to make a tired family feel better. The angry businessman on the phone had lowered his voice. He couldn't shout over the sound of the family laughing. The old woman who had been tapping her foot had stopped. She was watching Keanu with a soft look on her face, her annoyance completely gone. It is hard to be angry when you are watching something so pure. Keanu wasn't doing it for attention. He wasn't doing it to look good. He just seemed to genuinely like people. He saw that the parents were drowning a little bit, and he threw them a lifeline. He made them feel seen and validated in a world that usually treats people like numbers in a queue. Eventually, the little girl curled up in her mother's lap and fell asleep, exhausted from her crying fit. The little boy sat down quietly, leaning against Keanu's leg, looking at the pictures in a car magazine Keanu had handed him. The father looked at Keanu, his eyes full of gratitude. "I really can't thank you enough," he said quietly. "You didn't have to do that. You made our day." Keanu shook his hand, his grip firm and friendly. "You're good parents. Hang in there. We're all in the waiting room together, right?" He stood up and brushed off his jeans, returning to his seat. The energy in that corner of the room had completely transformed. The family was relaxed for the first time all day. The toxic cloud that had been hanging over the waiting room had lifted, replaced by a feeling of warmth and connection. Keanu sat back down on his hard plastic chair, looking content. He hadn't fixed a car or solved a global crisis, but he had fixed the mood, one small kindness at a time. And in that moment, he wasn't a superstar. He was just a really good human being. As the afternoon wore on, the chaotic rhythm of the auto shop shifted into a lower, heavier gear. The initial rush of panic had settled into a deep, aching exhaustion. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long, golden beams across the oil-stained concrete floor. The mechanics, who had been running around like headless chickens hours ago, were now moving in slow motion. Their shoulders slumped, their uniforms were soaked through with sweat and grease, and the dark circles under their eyes were getting more noticeable by the minute. Inside the waiting area, the staff finally managed to clear some space. A service writer was trying to move a few customers to different spots to organize the queue better. The commotion caused a bit of a traffic jam near the glass doors. That is when a fragile-looking elderly woman, who had been sitting quietly in the corner for hours, realized her ride had arrived. A taxi was honking loudly outside, impatient for her to come out. The woman, who looked to be in her 80s, began to gather her things. It was a painful process for everyone to watch. She had 3 large, heavy tote bags filled with groceries and personal items. She also had a cane that she relied on heavily to walk. She grabbed one bag, then another, trying to balance them while pushing herself up from the low chair. Her hands were shaking, and it was clear she was physically struggling with the weight. The 3rd bag slipped from her grasp and hit the floor with a heavy thud, spilling a few apples onto the dirty carpet. The taxi honked again, longer and louder this time. The sound was jarring and rude. People in the waiting room looked up, annoyed by the noise, but nobody moved immediately. They were tired, or maybe they were just waiting for someone else to help. It was one of those awkward moments where everyone freezes, waiting for a cue. But not Keanu. He had been watching the woman from his seat with a quiet focus. The moment he saw her stumble, he didn't hesitate. He didn't look around for a staff member to delegate the task to. He didn't sigh at the inconvenience. He just launched himself out of his seat with a burst of energy. In 3 long strides, he was by her side. He didn't grab her arm aggressively, he offered it gently, leaning down so she could see his face. "Whoa, easy there," he said, his voice low and soothing. "Let me help you with those." He bent down and scooped up the spilled apples with one hand, placing them back into the bag. Then, without showing any sign of strain, he lifted the 2 heavy tote bags, slinging them over his shoulder. He reached for the 3rd one and held it in his free hand. "I've got them," he told her with a reassuring nod. "You just focus on walking. Take your time." The woman looked up at him, startled at first. She probably recognized him, but in that moment, she just looked relieved. She let out a breath she had been holding. "Oh, bless you, young man. Thank you." Keanu walked her to the door, opening it with his back and holding it wide so she could pass through without trouble. He didn't rush her, even as the taxi driver honked a 3rd time. Keanu actually shot a look at the driver, a calm but firm stare that seemed to say, "Give her a minute." The driver stopped honking. He walked her all the way to the curb, right up to the taxi door. He carefully loaded her heavy bags into the trunk of the car, making sure they wouldn't tip over. Then he helped her lower herself into the back seat, making sure she was comfortable and that her cane was within reach. "You have a good evening now," Keanu said, closing the door gently for her. The woman rolled down the window, smiling broadly. "You are a very good person. Thank you again." "Take care," he replied, waving as the taxi pulled away. The entire waiting room was watching through the glass. Their noses were practically pressed against the window. The angry businessman had stopped his pacing. The young couple with the kids were watching in awe. It was a simple act of helping someone with their groceries, but seeing someone of his stature do it with such genuine care was shocking. He didn't do it for the applause. He did it because it was the right thing to do. But Keanu wasn't done. As he turned and walked back toward the shop entrance, he paused for a moment. He looked into the open garage bay. He saw the mechanics. He saw the grime on their faces, the grease caked under their fingernails, and the way they were wiping their foreheads with dirty rags. He saw guys who had been on their feet for 10 hours, dealing with angry customers and broken cars, getting absolutely zero credit for it. Keanu changed direction. Instead of going back to his plastic chair in the waiting room, he walked straight into the workshop area. He passed by the sign that said employees only like it wasn't even there. He walked over to the vending machine in the break area. The mechanics nearby stopped what they were doing. One guy was holding a wrench, mid-air, just staring. Keanu Reeves was standing in their break room. Keanu pulled out his wallet. He didn't just buy one bottle of water. He started feeding money into the machine. He punched the buttons for water bottles, sports drinks, and energy bars. Clunk. 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 The machine spat out item after item. He gathered them up in his arms until they were stacked high against his chest. He walked out to the center of the garage, right into the middle of the grease and noise. "Hey guys," Keanu said, his voice cutting through the sound of the air compressors. A mechanic turned around, wiping his hands on a rag. Mr. Reeves, is everything okay with your bike?" "Oh, the bike is fine," Keanu said. "I just wanted to say thanks. You guys are working incredibly hard. I know it's been a crazy day." He started handing out the cold drinks. He handed a sports drink to the mechanic with the wrench. He handed a water to the technician who was lying on a creeper under a truck. He handed an energy bar to the service writer who looked like he was about to cry from stress. "Thanks for being here," Keanu told them. He looked each of them in the eye as he handed them the drink. "Seriously. You guys are the real deal." The mechanics stood there, stunned. They were holding these 50-cent drinks like they were gold trophies. They were used to people yelling at them, ignoring them, or looking down on them for having dirty jobs. No one had ever bought them a round of drinks just to say thank you. One of the younger mechanics, a guy with grease all over his cheeks, took the water bottle. He looked like he wanted to say something cool, but he just stammered, "Man, I love your movies." Keanu laughed, that big, genuine laugh. "Thanks, man. I appreciate it. You enjoy that water." He made sure every single person in the shop had a drink or a snack before he turned around to go back to his seat. He didn't wait for a thank you. He didn't take a selfie. He just wiped his hands on his jeans and walked back into the waiting area. The room was completely silent now. The energy had totally changed. The frustration was gone, replaced by a sense of wonder. The people sitting in the waiting room didn't see a celebrity anymore. They didn't see John Wick. They just saw a man who had walked in, kept his cool, helped an old lady with her bags, and bought the staff a round of drinks because he felt like it. It was a masterclass in how to be a decent human being. And it left absolutely everyone speechless. The sun had finally set, and the streetlights outside the shop flickered on, casting long shadows across the parking lot inside. The chaos of the day had finally died down. The noise of the air tools had stopped, the phones had stopped ringing, and the only sounds left were the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet murmur of the staff cleaning up their tools. It had been a very long day for everyone, but the mood in the building was completely different now. It wasn't angry or exhausted anymore, it was peaceful, almost buzzing with a quiet energy. Keanu was still sitting on the hard plastic bench, but now he stood up and stretched his arms high above his head. He looked tired, just like everyone else, but he wasn't complaining. The mechanic he had been watching all day came walking through the glass doors from the garage, wiping his hands on a fresh rag. He was holding a clipboard and a set of keys. "Mr. Reeves?" the mechanic asked, walking over to him. Keanu turned around, his face lighting up. "Hey. Is she ready?" "She's all ready," the mechanic said, a genuine smile on his face. "We replaced the chain, tightened the brakes, and fixed that oil leak. She runs like new now." "That is great news," Keanu said, nodding appreciatively. "Thank you so much for taking care of her." They walked over to the counter together. The shop manager was there, looking nervous again. He typed on the computer for a moment and then looked at the screen. He looked at Keanu, then back at the screen. He sighed and looked up. "Okay," the manager started, "so, the total comes to 350. But, listen, man. I can't take your money. We made you wait for 5 hours. We put you in that crowded room. It was a mess. I am so embarrassed. Please, just take it. It's on the house. Consider it a formal apology." The manager waved his hand, dismissing the total on the screen. The other employees standing nearby watched intently. It made sense, right? A huge star waits for hours, treats the staff like gold, helps out with chores, and the shop gives him a free repair as a thank you. It's how the world usually works. Rich people get free stuff. But Keanu immediately shook his head. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. It was a well-worn leather wallet, not a fancy designer one. "No, absolutely not," Keanu said firmly. "You guys did the work. You ordered the parts. You fixed my bike. I'm going to pay." "Please," the manager insisted. "I feel terrible about the wait." "Don't," Keanu said, stopping him with a kind look. "I told you, it wasn't a problem. I enjoyed my time here. Honestly. I met some nice people, I saw how hard you guys work. You earn this money." He pulled out a handful of bills and placed them on the counter. Then, he counted out some more. "And this," Keanu said, placing a thick stack of cash next to the money for the bill, "is for the guys in the back. Specifically for the mechanic who stayed late to finish the bike, and the rest of the crew. Buy yourselves dinner tonight. You guys deserve it." The manager looked down at the money. It was a massive tip. Way more than the bill actually was. He looked up at Keanu, his mouth slightly open, not knowing what to say. "Sir, this is too much. This is hundreds of dollars." "Take it," Keanu said, closing his wallet and putting it back in his pocket. "They worked hard. Treat them right." The room was silent again. It wasn't an awkward silence this time. It was a silence of pure respect. This man, who had every reason to be angry, who could have demanded everything for free, had not only paid full price but tipped the workers more than they made in a day. He valued their time. He valued their labor. He saw them as human beings who deserved to be paid well for their sweat. As the receipt was printing, the mechanic who had worked on the bike slowly walked around the counter. He was holding a clean shop towel and a marker. He looked shy, like a little kid meeting his hero. Mr. Reeves, the mechanic asked, his voice cracking slightly. Keanu turned to him, attentive. Yeah, buddy, what's up? Listen, I know you're probably tired and want to get going, the mechanic stammered. But, my dad, he's a huge fan. And I mean, I'm a huge fan. The Matrix, John Wick, everything. Would you mind? I mean, could I maybe get your autograph just for my garage wall? He looked terrified that he was asking too much. Keanu's face broke into a huge, warm grin. He didn't roll his eyes or look at his watch. He looked genuinely flattered. Are you kidding me? I would love to. He didn't ask for a fancy photo or a glossy poster. He took the marker and the dirty white towel the mechanic handed him. He signed his name clearly and added a little smiley face next to it. Then, the receptionist asked if he could sign an old hat. The other mechanic asked for a signature on his work apron. Keanu signed every single one. He took the time to chat with the mechanic about his dad, asking how old he was and what his favorite movie was. He stood there for 10 minutes, signing things and making the staff feel like they were the most important people in the world. Finally, it was time to go. Keanu shook hands with everyone in the shop, looking them in the eye and thanking them again. Take care of yourselves, he said. Drive safe. He walked out into the cool night air. The staff followed him to the door, watching as he walked over to his motorcycle. It wasn't a flashy, chrome-covered show bike. It was a machine that looked like it had been ridden. He put on his helmet, swung his leg over the seat, and kicked the engine to life. The roar of the bike echoed in the quiet street. He didn't speed off like a maniac. He just sat there for a moment, checking the road, before giving a small wave to the group of people standing in the doorway of the shop. Then, he eased out onto the street and rode off into the darkness, blending back into the city. The staff stood there for a long time after he was gone. They looked at each other, looked at the signatures on their towels and hats, and looked at the cash on the counter. They felt different. The day hadn't just been about fixing cars. It had been a reminder that no matter who you are, or how much money you have, kindness is the most valuable thing you can give. The angry businessman and the grumpy customers from earlier felt like a distant memory. All that was left was the feeling that they had just been in the presence of someone truly special. And as they turned off the lights and locked the door, they didn't feel tired anymore. They felt inspired.